My mother-in-law slapped me so hard I hit the floor as she screeched, "You lying woman, that baby belongs to some random man." Husband raged, "Pack your shit and die somewhere else." My mother-in-law sneered to my sister-in-law, "Don't worry, you'll give birth to the first real grandchild." I stayed silent. After a week, when the DNA test arrived, I threw it at the whole family and left the whole family horrified. My name is Megan, and I've been married to my husband Ethan for 4 years. We met in college and got married right after graduation. Ethan comes from what I thought was a close-knit family: his mother Susan, his father Philip, and his younger sister Brooke, who got married to her husband Derek about 2 years ago. From the beginning, Susan never really liked me. She had this way of making little comments that seemed innocent enough but always left me feeling small. "Oh, Megan's cooking is interesting," she'd say with that fake smile. Or, "I'm sure Ethan will learn to appreciate your unique style eventually." Ethan always brushed it off, saying his mom was just protective and that she'd warm up to me eventually. Brooke and I had a decent relationship, though she was clearly Susan's favorite. Susan would constantly talk about how Brooke was going to give her beautiful grandchildren and how she couldn't wait to be a grandmother. It stung a little, especially when Ethan and I had been trying to conceive for over a year. When I finally got pregnant 8 months ago, I was over the moon. Ethan was thrilled too, and for a moment, I thought maybe this would be the thing that finally brought Susan and me together. I was wrong. Instead of excitement, Susan seemed almost suspicious. She made comments about how I suddenly got pregnant and how convenient the timing was. I didn't understand what she meant at first, but her attitude only got worse as my pregnancy progressed. The comments escalated during my pregnancy. Susan would make remarks about how the baby didn't look like Ethan in the ultrasound photos, which was ridiculous because you could barely make out features anyway. She'd joke about paternity tests and how these days, you never know. Ethan would tell her to stop, but he never really stood up to her forcefully. Meanwhile, Brooke announced her pregnancy about 3 months after mine. Susan was absolutely ecstatic. She threw Brooke a huge baby shower, bought her everything she could possibly need, and constantly talked about her first real grandchild. The way she emphasized real whenever she talked about Brooke's baby versus mine was like a knife to my heart every time. My baby shower was a small, awkward affair. Susan showed up but spent most of the time talking about Brooke's pregnancy and how she was glowing so beautifully. She gave me a single gift, a generic baby blanket that still had the price tag on it from the dollar store. When I went into labor 3 weeks ago, everything seemed normal at first. Ethan was by my side, and despite the pain, I was excited to finally meet our son. We named him Caleb, and he was perfect: 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a healthy set of lungs. The problem started when Susan and Philip came to visit us in the hospital. The moment Susan walked into the room and saw Caleb, her face changed. She stared at him for a long time, and I could see something dark brewing behind her eyes. "He doesn't look like Ethan," she said coldly. "Mom, he's literally just been born," Ethan replied, holding Caleb gently. "Babies change a lot in the first few weeks." But Susan wasn't having it. She kept staring at Caleb with this expression of disgust and suspicion. She barely held him, and when she did, it was like she was handling something contaminated. We brought Caleb home 2 days later, and I thought things might settle down. I should have known better. The first week at home was exhausting but beautiful. Ethan was being an amazing father, taking night shifts and helping with everything. Caleb was a relatively easy baby, sleeping well and feeding regularly. I was starting to feel like maybe we could be a happy little family despite Susan's attitude. Then came the day that changed everything. Ethan had gone back to work after taking a week off, and I was alone with Caleb when Susan showed up unannounced. She had a key to our house, something Ethan had given her years ago that I'd always been uncomfortable with, and she just walked right in. "We need to talk," she said, her voice cold and hard. I was sitting on the couch nursing Caleb, and I felt immediately defensive. Something about her posture and tone set off every alarm bell in my head. "What about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Susan sat down across from me, but instead of the usual fake politeness, her mask was completely off. The hatred in her eyes was unmistakable. "That baby," she said, pointing at Caleb, "is not my son's child." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. I've been watching, and I know. That baby doesn't look like Ethan, doesn't look like anyone in our family. You've been lying this whole time." My hands started shaking. "Susan, that's absolutely ridiculous. Of course Caleb is Ethan's son. How can you even say something like that?" "Because I have eyes," she snapped. "I know my son, and I know our family genetics. That baby is not ours." I tried to stay calm, but my voice was rising. "You're being completely unreasonable. Babies don't always look like their parents right away, and don't you dare lie to me." Susan stood up, her face red with rage. "I know what you've been doing. I know you've been cheating on my son." "I have never cheated on Ethan," I shouted back, my own anger finally boiling over. "How dare you accuse me of something like that?" That's when Susan completely lost it. "You lying whore," she screamed, and before I could react, her hand came flying across my face. The slap was so hard and so unexpected that I fell backward off the couch, still clutching Caleb. I managed to twist my body to protect him, but I hit the floor hard, my head bouncing off the coffee table. For a moment, everything went white. Caleb was crying, I was seeing stars, and Susan was standing over me, her face twisted with rage. "You lying woman," she screeched. "That baby belongs to some random man. I know it, and soon everyone else will too." I struggled to sit up, my head pounding and my cheek on fire. Caleb was screaming now, probably more from being startled than hurt, but I was terrified that Susan's violence had somehow injured him. "Get out," I whispered, then louder, "get out of my house." But Susan wasn't done. "I'm telling Ethan everything. I'm telling him what kind of woman he married. And we're getting a DNA test to prove what I already know." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard that pictures fell off the wall. I sat on the floor for I don't know how long, just holding Caleb and crying. My face was swelling, my head was throbbing, and I felt completely violated. The woman had come into my home and physically attacked me while I was holding my newborn baby. When Ethan came home that evening, I was still shaken. I told him everything that had happened, showing him the bruise on my face and the bump on my head where I'd hit the coffee table. I expected him to be furious with his mother. I expected him to call her immediately and demand an apology. Instead, he got very quiet and asked me to tell him exactly what happened again. So I did. And when I finished, Ethan was silent for a long time. "Ethan?" I said. "You believe me, right? You know I would never cheat on you?" More silence. "Ethan?" He finally looked at me, and there was something different in his eyes. Something cold. "My mom said she's been suspicious for a while," he said slowly. "She said there were signs." I felt like the world was tilting. "What signs?" "Ethan, what are you talking about?" "She said you were acting strange during the pregnancy. Secretive. And Caleb." He trailed off. "Caleb what?" "He doesn't really look like me, Megan." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "He's 3 weeks old. He barely looks like a human being yet, let alone anyone specific." But I could see that Susan's poison had already taken root. The doubt was there in Ethan's eyes, and it was growing. "Maybe we should just do the DNA test," he said quietly. "Just to put all this to rest." I felt like I was in a nightmare. "You want to DNA test our son because your mother hit me and called me a whore?" "It's not about what she did," Ethan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's just for peace of mind." "Whose peace of mind?" I demanded. "I know Caleb is your son. You should know it too." But the damage was done. Ethan had been infected with his mother's suspicions, and there was no going back. The next day, Susan called Ethan and told him she'd already arranged for a DNA test. She'd made appointments and everything. Ethan didn't even consult me, he just told me we were going. I was furious, hurt, and completely betrayed, but I agreed to the test because I knew it would prove them all wrong. Caleb was Ethan's son, and once we had scientific proof, this nightmare would be over. We went to the clinic, had the swabs taken, and were told results would be available in 7 to 10 business days. The whole time, Susan kept making comments about how the truth always comes out and how she was protecting her son from a lying woman. Ethan didn't defend me. Not once. That night, Ethan slept in the guest room. He said he needed space to think. I lay in our bed alone, holding Caleb and wondering how my life had fallen apart so quickly. The next few days were torture. Ethan was cold and distant, barely speaking to me except when necessary for Caleb's care. Susan called multiple times a day, each time asking if the results were in yet. Brooke started avoiding me too, which hurt almost as much as everything else. What made everything worse was how Ethan started treating Caleb. Before Susan's accusations, Ethan had been a devoted father. He would hold Caleb for hours, talk to him in that silly voice parents use, and take dozens of photos every day. He'd been so proud, showing Caleb off to his co-workers and posting pictures on social media with captions like "my little man" and "daddy's boy." But after the accusations, everything changed. Ethan still took care of Caleb's basic needs, feeding, diaper changes, putting him down for naps, but the warmth was gone. He held Caleb like he was handling someone else's child, mechanically and without the joy that had been there before. The silly voices stopped. The photos stopped. The social media posts disappeared entirely. It broke my heart watching them together. Caleb would look up at Ethan with those trusting baby eyes, reaching for him the way he always had, but Ethan would barely make eye contact. Sometimes I'd catch Ethan staring at Caleb with this conflicted expression, like he was trying to see something that wasn't there or trying not to see something that was. The worst part was bedtime. Ethan used to read to Caleb every night, even though he was too young to understand. He'd sit in the rocking chair with Caleb on his chest, reading everything from children's books to news articles in that soft, loving voice. Caleb would fall asleep to the sound of his father's heartbeat and voice. Now Ethan wouldn't even come into the nursery. He'd stand in the doorway sometimes, watching me put Caleb to sleep, but he wouldn't come closer. When I'd ask him to help, he'd make excuses about being tired or having work to do. The isolation was crushing. My own mother lived 3 states away, and while she called every day to check on us, she couldn't be there physically. My few close friends tried to be supportive, but most of them were Ethan's friends too, and I could sense their discomfort with the situation. Nobody wanted to take sides, so they mostly just stayed away entirely. Susan's daily phone calls became increasingly aggressive. She'd start each conversation asking about the test results, but when I tell her they weren't in yet, she'd launch into these rants about how I was destroying her son's life and how I needed to come clean before the truth came out. She described in detail how she was going to protect Ethan and the family once my lies were exposed. During one particularly nasty call, Susan told me she'd already been looking into lawyers for Ethan. "He's going to need a good attorney when he divorces you," she said with vicious satisfaction. "And he'll need help getting full custody of that baby, assuming it's even his, which we both know it's not." "Susan, stop calling me," I said, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. "I'll stop calling when you stop lying," she snapped back. "My son deserves better than a cheating whore." I hung up and blocked her number, but she just started calling from different phones: Philip's cell, Brooke's phone, even their landline that I didn't know they still had. Brooke's betrayal hurt almost as much as Ethan's. We'd always had a good relationship, or so I thought. We'd go shopping together, have lunch dates, text each other funny memes and pregnancy updates when we were both expecting. I'd been looking forward to our children growing up together as cousins. But after Susan's accusations, Brooke completely changed toward me. She stopped responding to my texts. When I called her directly, she was cold and formal, saying things like, "I think it's best if we don't talk until this situation is resolved." When I asked her if she really believed I'd cheated on Ethan, she was quiet for a long time before saying, "I think Mom has good instincts about people." That comment haunted me. Brooke had known me for 4 years. She'd been my maid of honor at my wedding. She'd seen how much Ethan and I loved each other, how excited we were about starting a family. And yet, when her mother accused me of infidelity with no evidence whatsoever, Brooke chose to believe Susan over me. The worst call came 3 days before the DNA results were due. Ethan was at work, and I was home alone with Caleb when my phone rang. It was Brooke, but she sounded different, nervous and almost guilty. "Megan, I need to tell you something," she said without preamble. "What is it?" "Mom's been preparing things for when the test results come back." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean, preparing?" "She's been talking to Ethan about divorce lawyers. She's looked into custody laws. She's even researched private investigators to try to figure out who she thinks you cheated with." I felt sick. "Brooke, you know this is insane, right? You know I didn't cheat." There was a long pause. "I want to believe you, Megan. I really do. But Mom is so sure, and she's never wrong about these things." "What things? When has Susan ever been in a situation like this before?" She has good instincts about people's character." "My character?" "Brooke, you've known me for 4 years. What about my character suggests I'm a cheater and a liar?" Another pause. "I don't know. Maybe I didn't know you as well as I thought." That's when I realized that Susan hadn't just poisoned Ethan against me, she'd systematically turned the entire family. Brooke, who I considered a friend and sister, now saw me as a stranger capable of terrible things. "There's something else," Brooke continued, her voice getting smaller. "Mom wants to have a family meeting when the results come in. She wants everyone there: me, Derek, Dad, Ethan, and you. She says it's important that we handle this as a family and make decisions about the baby's future." "Decisions about Caleb's future?" I repeated, my voice rising. "He's my son." "If he's Ethan's son," Brooke said quietly, "then he's part of our family too. But if he isn't?" She didn't finish the sentence, but I could hear the implication. If Caleb wasn't Ethan's biological child, they were planning to push us both out entirely. "Brooke, listen to yourself. This is my baby we're talking about. I gave birth to him. I'm his mother. No DNA test is going to change that." "But if you cheated?" "I didn't cheat," I screamed, causing Caleb to startle and cry. "Why won't any of you believe me?" Brooke was quiet for a moment, then said, "Maybe because you're the only one who says you didn't." After that call, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. Even Brooke, who I thought might be my ally, had been completely turned against me. I was facing this entire family united in their belief that I was a liar and a cheater. That night, Ethan came home late from work, claiming he'd had to stay for a meeting. But I could smell perfume on his shirt, and it wasn't mine. When I asked him about it, he got defensive and angry. "Are you seriously accusing me of something now?" he snapped. "After everything you've put this family through?" "I just asked about the perfume, Ethan. It's probably from someone at the office. People wear perfume to work, Megan. Not everyone has ulterior motives like some people." The implication was clear. He was suggesting that I was projecting my own infidelity onto him. It was such a cruel twist of logic that I couldn't even respond. I felt completely alone and isolated. The two people I'd trusted most in the world, my husband and my mother-in-law, awful as she was, had turned against me based on nothing but suspicion and hate. On the 4th day, Ethan came home from work with his whole family in tow: Susan, Philip, Brooke, and Brooke's husband Derek. They all sat in my living room like some kind of tribunal, waiting to pass judgment on me. "The results should be in tomorrow or the next day," Susan announced, as if she were the one in charge of my household. "And then we'll know the truth." I was holding Caleb, trying to stay calm, but I could feel my hands shaking with rage and hurt. "And what exactly do you think is going to happen when the test proves Caleb is Ethan's son?" I asked. Susan smiled coldly. "If that happens, then I'll apologize. But we both know it won't. Brooke, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. Megan, if you just tell the truth now, maybe we can work through this as a family. I stared at her in disbelief. Tell the truth about what? I've never lied to any of you. Just admit you cheated, Susan said bluntly. Admit that baby isn't Ethan's, and we can figure out what to do next. I'm not admitting to something I didn't do. That's when Ethan finally exploded. Just stop lying, he yelled, standing up suddenly. Everyone can see it. Everyone knows. Just tell the fucking truth for once. I stood up too, holding Caleb protectively. The truth is that Caleb is your son, and your mother is a psychotic bitch who has poisoned your mind. Ethan's face went red. Don't you dare call my mother names when you're the one who's been lying and cheating. I have never cheated on you. Then why doesn't Caleb look like me? Why doesn't he look like anyone in my family? I was crying now, Caleb was crying, and the whole room was in chaos. Pack your shit and die somewhere else. Ethan screamed at me. I can't even look at you right now. The words hit me like physical blows. This was my husband, the man I'd loved for 6 years, the man whose child I was holding, telling me to go die somewhere. Susan was smiling triumphantly. Don't worry, Brooke, she said to her daughter, loud enough for everyone to hear. You'll give birth to the first real grandchild. At least we'll have one legitimate baby in this family. That's when something inside me broke. I looked around the room at all of them, Ethan with his red face and furious eyes, Susan with her satisfied smirk, Philip who wouldn't even look at me, Brooke who was nodding along with her mother, and Derek who was just sitting there like this was entertainment. And I made a decision. I didn't say another word. I just walked upstairs with Caleb, packed a bag with essentials, and left. I drove to my sister's house across town and told her everything. My sister Kelly was absolutely furious on my behalf. She wanted to call the police about Susan hitting me, wanted to call a lawyer, wanted to do something. But I was too emotionally exhausted to deal with any of that. I just wanted to wait for the DNA results and prove them all wrong. I stayed at Kelly's house for 10 days. Ethan texted me a few times, but only about practical things like Caleb's feeding schedule and doctor appointments. He never asked if I was okay or if I needed anything. Susan, Brooke, and Philip didn't contact me at all. The 10 days at Kelly's gave me time to think clearly for the first time in months. Away from the constant tension and accusations, I could see just how toxic the situation had become. Kelly was furious on my behalf, but she also helped me process everything that had happened. You know what bothers me most about this whole thing? Kelly said one evening as we sat in her living room, Caleb sleeping peacefully in my arms. It's not just that they accused you of cheating. It's how quickly they all turned on you without any evidence. She was right. There had been no suspicious behavior on my part, no unexplained absences, no secret phone calls or messages. Susan's entire case was based on the fact that Caleb didn't look like Ethan in her opinion. That was it. And somehow, that had been enough to convince my husband that I was a liar and a cheater. Ethan used to tell me he loved how loyal I was, I told Kelly. He said it was one of the things that first attracted him to me, how I stood by my friends and family no matter what. And now he won't even give me the benefit of the doubt when his own mother accuses me of something horrible. Kelly shook her head. That's not love, Megan. That's possession. Love would mean trusting you, especially when someone else is trying to tear you down. During those 10 days, I also had time to really observe Caleb without the constant stress of accusations and suspicion. He was such a beautiful baby, alert and responsive. He was starting to develop more defined features, as babies do in their first weeks of life, and I was beginning to see subtle hints of Ethan's family traits. More importantly, I could see that Caleb was beginning to develop features that reminded me of Ethan, though they were still subtle. The shape of Caleb's nose, the curve of his eyebrows, even the way he moved his hands, there were hints of Ethan there. In a few months, the resemblance would likely become much clearer. But by then, it might be too late to repair the damage that had been done. I spent hours looking through old family photos that I'd brought with me, trying to understand Susan's claim that Caleb didn't look like anyone in Ethan's family. What I found was interesting. Ethan himself had been a pretty unremarkable-looking baby. In his newborn photos, he looked like most babies do, red, wrinkled, and not particularly like anyone. It wasn't until he was several months old that his features started to develop into something recognizably Ethan. But Susan had convinced herself and everyone else that there should be some immediate, obvious resemblance. She'd created this narrative in her head and then found evidence to support it, no matter how flimsy. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Susan's accusations weren't really about Caleb's appearance. They were about her hatred of me and her desire to drive me away from her son. Caleb's looks were just the excuse she'd been waiting for. One afternoon, while Caleb was napping, I made a decision that would prove to be crucial later. I called Ethan's Aunt Margaret in Oregon, Philip's sister who lived across the country and rarely visited. I'd met her only once, at our wedding, but she'd seemed kind and down-to-earth, very different from Susan. Margaret was surprised to hear from me, but she was warm and friendly. When I explained what was happening, she was shocked. Susan thinks the baby isn't Ethan's because he doesn't look like the family? Margaret laughed, but not unkindly. Oh honey, that woman doesn't know her own family history. What do you mean? Has she ever shown you pictures of our father when he was a baby? Ethan's grandfather? No, I don't think I've ever seen baby pictures of him. Well, I'll send you some. The family resemblance is really strong, though it might not be obvious right now since your little one is still so young. But the bone structure, the way he holds his head, it's very reminiscent of Daddy as a baby. My heart started racing. Really? Oh yes. And you know what's funny? Philip looked nothing like Daddy when he was born. Nothing at all. Grandma used to joke that the hospital must have switched babies. But as Philip got older, the resemblance became clear. Sometimes genetics work in mysterious ways, features that skip generations, traits that don't show up until months or even years later. Margaret went on to tell me more about the family history, stories about how different family members had looked as babies versus how they looked as adults, about recessive genes that would pop up unexpectedly, about relatives who looked nothing like their parents but everything like their great-grandparents. The thing about Susan, Margaret said carefully, is that she's never really understood that families are complicated. She likes everything to be simple and obvious. If she can't see something immediately, she assumes it doesn't exist. That conversation gave me hope, but it also made me incredibly sad. Here was information that could have resolved everything, family history that explained Caleb's appearance perfectly. But Susan had been so convinced of her narrative that she'd never bothered to look deeper into her own family's genetics. Even worse, Ethan had never thought to call his aunt or look at old family photos. He just accepted his mother's word as gospel and turned against his wife and son. On the 10th day, Ethan texted me that the results were in and that his whole family would be at the house at 7 p.m. He said I needed to be there too. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to just stay away and let them all stew in their own hatred. But I knew I had to face this. I had to be there when the truth came out and they all realized how wrong they'd been. I arrived at 7 p.m. exactly. Ethan answered the door, but he wouldn't look me in the eye. The whole family was there again, sitting in the same spots as before. Susan was holding the envelope with the DNA results, a satisfied smile on her face. Well, she said as I sat down with Caleb, I think we all know what this is going to say. Ethan still wouldn't look at me. Brooke was staring at the floor. Philip was checking his phone like he had somewhere else to be. Just open it, I said quietly. Susan tore open the envelope with dramatic flair, clearly enjoying her moment of triumph. She pulled out the papers and began reading. And then her face changed. The smile disappeared first, replaced by confusion. Then the confusion turned to shock. Then the shock turned to something that looked like horror. What does it say? Ethan demanded when his mother didn't speak. Susan was reading and rereading the paper, her face getting paler by the second. Mom, what does it say? Brooke asked. Finally, Susan looked up, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before, fear. It says. She started, then stopped. She cleared her throat and tried again. It says the probability of paternity is 99.97%. The room went dead silent. What does that mean? Ethan asked, though I could tell from his voice that he already knew. It means Caleb is definitely your son, I said quietly. Ethan's face crumpled. Brooke gasped. Philip finally looked up from his phone. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair. But I wasn't done. I had spent the week at Kelly's house doing more than just waiting for DNA results. I had been thinking, and planning, and making some calls of my own. Actually, I said, standing up and taking the DNA results from Susan's shaking hands, there's something else you all should know. I had their attention now. Everyone was staring at me. I did some research this week about paternity testing and genetics. Did you know that sometimes babies don't look like their fathers not because they're not related, but because of recessive genes? Or because they look more like grandparents or great-grandparents? Ethan was starting to look sick. So I did some digging into your family history, Ethan. I called your Aunt Margaret, you know, your dad's sister who lives in Oregon? The one your family doesn't talk to much? Philip's face went white. Aunt Margaret was very helpful. She told me all sorts of interesting stories about the family, including some things about your father that you probably don't know. I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo that Margaret had sent me. This is your grandfather, Philip's father, when he was a baby. Notice the bone structure and facial proportions. The photo showed a baby that had similar features to Caleb, though as with most newborn comparisons, you had to look carefully to see the resemblance. But that wasn't the best part. Margaret also told me about the paternity scandal in your family from the 1970s. Apparently, your grandmother had some doubts about whether Philip was actually your grandfather's son. They did testing back then too. Philip stood up suddenly. That's enough. But I wasn't stopping now. The tests showed that Philip was indeed his father's son. But they also revealed something else interesting about the family genetics. Something about how recessive traits can skip generations and resurface. I looked directly at Susan. Something that would explain why Caleb has certain facial features and bone structure that might remind people of his great-grandfather, even though he's still too young for the resemblance to be obvious. Susan was shaking now. You had no right to. I had every right, I snapped. You accused me of cheating, you physically assaulted me, you turned my husband against me, and you tried to destroy my family based on nothing but your own hatred. I turned to Ethan. Your son has your family's genetics, just expressed in ways that aren't immediately obvious. If you'd bother to look at old family photos and understand how genetics actually work instead of listening to your mother's uninformed opinions, you might have figured that out yourself. Ethan was crying now. Megan, no. I held up my hand. You don't get to talk now. You told me to pack my shit and die somewhere else. You called me a liar and a cheater. You let your mother hit me while I was holding our newborn son. I looked around the room at all of them. I'm done with all of you. I gathered my things and headed for the door, but I turned back one more time. Susan, I said, looking directly at my mother-in-law, you were right about one thing. Brooke will give birth to your first real grandchild. Because Caleb and I won't be part of this family anymore. Susan started to cry. Megan, please, I made a mistake. You made a choice, I corrected her. You chose to believe the worst about me instead of giving me the benefit of the doubt. You chose to physically attack me. You chose to poison my marriage with your hatred. Ethan was begging now. Megan, please, we can work through this. I was wrong, I'm sorry, You're sorry now that you have proof, I said. But you should have believed me because you love me. You should have defended me because I'm your wife. You should have kicked your mother out of our house the second she hit me. Brooke finally spoke up. Megan, families make mistakes. We can. You're not my family, I said simply. My family would never treat me the way you all did. And with that, I left. I'm writing this from Kelly's house, where Caleb and I have been staying for the past 2 weeks. Ethan has called and texted hundreds of times. Susan has sent flowers and long apology letters. Brooke has tried to reach out through social media. Philip even showed up at Kelly's house once, though she didn't let him in. I've spoken to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce and requesting full custody. I'm also considering filing assault charges against Susan, though my lawyer says it might be hard to prove since I didn't go to the hospital immediately after she hit me. The hardest part is watching Caleb and knowing that I'm depriving him of his father. Ethan isn't a bad man, just a weak one. He let his mother's hatred influence him, but I truly believe he loves Caleb. Unfortunately, love isn't always enough. I can't be with someone who doesn't trust me. I can't raise my son in a family that sees him as illegitimate. I can't subject myself to Susan's ongoing hatred and manipulation. Brooke gave birth to her daughter 2 weeks ago, about a month premature but healthy. I heard through mutual friends that Susan is over the moon, calling her the most beautiful grandchild ever and spoiling her rotten. I'm happy for Brooke, truly. Her daughter deserves love and attention, but I'm also relieved that Caleb and I are no longer competing for scraps of affection from people who never really wanted us anyway. Ethan sent me a message yesterday saying that he's cut contact with Susan and that he's willing to do whatever it takes to win me back. He says he realizes now how badly he messed up and that he wants to be a family again. Part of me wants to believe him. Part of me still loves the man I married. But I can't forget the look in his eyes when he told me to pack my shit and die somewhere else. I can't forget how easily he believed the worst about me. Trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to rebuild. Caleb is thriving despite everything. He's a happy, healthy baby who smiles and coos and is already showing signs of being incredibly smart. The family resemblance to Ethan is becoming more apparent each week. Now I can see it in his expressions and developing features. In a few months, the resemblance will probably be much more obvious. But it shouldn't have mattered. Even if Caleb had looked nothing like Ethan, even if he'd been the product of an affair, which he wasn't, the way they treated me was inexcusable. No one deserves to be physically assaulted and emotionally abused, especially not while holding a newborn baby. I'm building a new life now. Kelly has been amazing, letting us stay with her and helping with Caleb. I'm looking for my own apartment and planning to go back to work part-time once Caleb is a bit older. It's scary being a single mother, but it's better than being trapped in a toxic situation. Some people have told me I should give Ethan another chance, that families go through rough patches and that Caleb deserves to have his father in his life. And maybe they're right. Maybe I'm being too harsh. But I keep coming back to that moment when Susan slapped me. Ethan wasn't there to defend me. I keep thinking about how quickly he believed his mother over his wife. I keep remembering the look of disgust in his eyes when he looked at our innocent baby. Some things can't be undone. Some words can't be taken back. Some trust can't be rebuilt. I threw those DNA results at them and walked away, and I haven't looked back since. For the first time in months, I feel free. Caleb deserves better than a family that questions his legitimacy based on uninformed assumptions about newborn appearance. I deserve better than a husband who doesn't trust me. We both deserve better than Susan's ongoing hatred and manipulation. So that's my story. The mother-in-law who accused me of cheating, the husband who believed her, and the DNA test that proved them all wrong. The family that fell apart not because of infidelity, but because of hatred, suspicion, and a complete lack of trust. I don't know what the future holds for Caleb and me, but I know it's going to be better than what we left behind. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's just walking away and building something better on your own.